Morning, everyone. So I've given this message the title Cautionary Tales. And so, due to short attention spans, I have given this first part is for kids. And it's for adults too, but so I was going to ask, do we have any kids here today? I want to see your hands. If there's a kid here, any kids, raise them high. All right, good. We got some. So I have a very short story for you. So it's only about 1 or 2 minutes, so that shouldn't exceed normal attention span. So a few years ago, I was walking back to my car at the park that I go to a bunch near my house, and there was a group of about 4 boys, probably 11 or 12, and I don't remember now what they said. Now, this wasn't that long ago, so I was 50s. But they said something very disrespectful to me. I don't remember what it was, and they started laughing. Now, what do you think I should have done about that? Anything?
I think you should ignore what they said and go on.
So, for the benefit of the tape, she said I thought I should ignore it and go on with what I did. Now, that was not my first thought.
Roland would say, run over him with his dirt bike.
But that is what I did. I let it go. Maybe I should have gone over there and asked them, hey, where's your mom? What's up with this? But I didn't do that. But there is a story in the Bible, very similar, where the guy didn't let it go. And he didn't let it go in a big way. So there's this man, and the man's name is Elisha. And his story, now keep in mind, this is not a story you're normally going to hear because it's a little PG-13. But it's not too bad. I don't think you'll have nightmares over it. There's a man named Elisha, and he was a great prophet of God. And he was the assistant prophet, if you want to say, to Elijah, who's also a great prophet of God. And so now when Elijah retired, if you want to call it that, Elisha took over. But he was pretty old when he took over. It wasn't like, he was a teenager. Now, so I'll read where the Bible picks up. So this is 2 Kings 2, verse 3. And it says, when he was going down the road to Bethel, a very large group, and I'm not reading exactly what it says, a very large group of boys, and it doesn't say how old, they could have been teenagers, but we're talking a big gang of boys, came from the city and made fun of him, saying, "Go up, you Baldy, get on out of here, Baldy." And now, we don't know how many it was, but it was at least 42. I'm thinking maybe more than that. So this was a gang. This wasn't just a cute little rascals group of kids. This was a big, unruly bunch of kids. And do you know what that man did? Well, he looked back at this big group of sneering boys, and he did something we wouldn't normally say you should do. He cursed them in the name of God. And then God took over, and he made 2 mama bears come out of the woods right there and mauled or tore up 42 of them. Now, it doesn't say they killed them, but they were severely injured. It doesn't say what happened. You can be pretty sure they didn't insult old men after that, for at least for a while. But anyway, you may think God was being too harsh with these kids, these boys. We don't know if they're kids, but these youths. But it does show what God thinks about disrespect to elders. Now, another lesson about this story is maybe most of these individual boys would not have taunted Elisha if he had been by themselves. But there's something about being in a group, a peer pressure kicks in, and a little bit of a mob mentality takes over. And So, for example, when that group of 4 boys made fun of me for no good reason, I don't. No, they probably had something to poke at. I don't know. But, it would have been good if one of them would have said, hey, look, guys, that's not respectful. Let's don't do that or something. But, it's hard to stand up to your friends. But I would encourage you, when your friends start doing something wrong, try to stand up to them. That is the brave thing to do. But anyway, I don't think a bear is going to come out of the woods for you. But don't make fun of old people is another part of this story. But anyway, so that is just one of those stories. Now, that one is a little hard to understand. It seems like, to me, in our modern ears, overkill to have a bear maul you for, making fun of somebody. But there's a few times in the Bible where stories and God relates things that are hard to understand, that we maybe can't explain. And I believe, though, that once we've made it to the kingdom, that, these will become obvious, or maybe not obvious, but we'll at least understand what the motivation behind some of these events are. And, we have to have faith that what God's doing is the best, eventually, or turn out for the best. And that's a big part of having faith in God, is even when tragedy strikes, to have faith that, he's in charge and that eventually things will work out for his people. So today, that's why I said a cautionary tale. So I'm going to look at a couple more of these type stories. So one of those, and a question you have is, stories of instant retribution. People usually pay the consequence of their sin, but usually it wasn't instantaneous like, the next minute where these bears came. So why does God let some people seem like they get away for a long time with sin and problems, and others, he just chomps down on them right away? I have no idea, but oh man, I forgot to start this. Anyway, so let's start look at the story of Uzzah. Uzzah. I'm going to call it Uzzah. Anyway, this story is in 2 Samuel 6. It also is in 1 Chronicles 13, the parallel account. So this is when King David was king, and he had gotten up an army of about 30,000 men, and he was going to go bring the ark, and it wasn't in Jerusalem at the time, and he was going to go get it and bring it back. And now, back in the books of the law, God had given very specific instructions on how you're supposed to carry the ark. Now, the ark, that's not just some fancy box. This was the most holy relic there was on the face of the earth, and probably still is, if it's somewhere, right? It is God's presence. The 10 Commandments was in it. Very important to follow the instructions. Well, the men didn't do that. They put it was supposed to be carried by the Levites, but they didn't do that. They put it on a cart pulled by oxen. I don't know if it was really all that heavy, but I guess maybe they thought it was okay to do it that way. Of course, the way oxen do, the cart's not that stable. And so they went over a bumpy place in the road, and Uzzah, who was walking kind of behind it, reached out and tried to grab it to keep it from falling over, which is kind of a natural instinct. Well, unfortunately for him, that's the last thing he ever did, because God struck him dead on the spot. And I'll read verse 7. This is Samuel 6:7. And the anger of the Lord burned against Uzzah, and God struck him down for his irreverence. He died there by the ark of God. Now it says initially David was angry, and I think he was angry at God, but, it just says he was angry because of God's outburst against Uzzah. Matter of fact, they even named the place Perez Uzzah, which means outburst against Uzzah. Later, David realized it was his own fault because, he was in charge, and he had not instructed him to carry it properly, which if 4 men had been carrying it, nobody would have grabbed it like that. So anyway, later on, they carried it the right way, the rest of Jerusalem. Of course, I'm skipping over several things that happened in the meantime, but now, here's where I actually kind of have an explanation, and this is just my conjecture, but first of all, God was probably, it says somewhere that he's slow to anger. Well, he was probably already steamed up because they were disobeying him by carrying it wrong in the first place. But he had told them, basically said, this is my word. You touch it, you die. So when somebody touched it, I felt like he had almost no choice. Sorry, you touch a 5,000 watt, high amp fence, you're going to die. And I said watt, I meant volt. Although I don't know how much 5,000 watts is. Maybe it's a lot too. Why do I distract myself like that? It's totally useless to do that. But anyway, so I think God just said, look, my word was said, and I have to let it be true. So maybe that's what happened there. It did say he got angry about it. Well, he was angry. Say, see, I told you, carry it right. But anyway, now David proclaimed God to be a God of mercy. And I'll just one brief verse to back that up. In Psalms 86, for example, and this is verse 15. But you, O Lord, are a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger and abundant in mercy and truth. Now, David rightly felt that God had shown him a lot of mercy, considering the magnitude of the sins and crimes he had committed. Having one of his best friends killed. But now he did not get off scot-free. He paid some grave consequences, but it wasn't immediate like Uzzah. So, on to another story similar, and that's a very common one is Lot's wife. Pretty much everybody knows it, but so God had decided to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah for their great sinfulness. And this is in Genesis 19. And but God decided to spare Abraham's nephew Lot. So the fact it was Abraham's nephew was a factor, but also because Lot was a righteous person, at least relatively speaking to the to the completely unrighteous rest of the crowd. So I'll pick it up now. So God sent 2 angels who appeared to be men. And the account refers to them as men, but they were just angels that looked like men. Told them, hey, you've got to get out of here. This place is getting burned down tomorrow. Leave. And Lot was hesitating. He didn't want to do it. So they grabbed him literally by the hand and made him leave. And he tried to talk his son-in-laws into leaving, but they thought he was kidding around. Like, hey, yeah, right. We're getting burned tomorrow. That's great. So they wouldn't go, but his daughters and his wife went. And they actually made it all the way to their destination, which was a place called, they ended up calling it Zoar. And was a little bit of a distance away. I'm not sure how far. And it says the sun had, this is verse 23, the sun had risen over the earth when Lot came to Zoar. So, I think that storybook we had a picture of them leaving like a mountain, and you could see Sodom in the valley. Well, they had already made it to their destination, which I hadn't really realized till I reread this account yesterday. But it says the sun came up in the morning, and it says risen over the earth. Then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the surrounding area and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. So he doesn't want them coming back anytime soon. I mean, he destroyed the crops. There's nothing living anywhere. But Lot's wife from behind looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. So there was some instant bad karma. They told her, I forgot to read this, although y'all realize it. In the instructions, they said, leave and do not look back. Of course, she couldn't help herself, and she looked back, and that was the last thing she ever did. Now, Jesus himself referred to that incident in Luke 17. So this is Luke 17, starting in verse 26. And Jesus said, and just as it happened in the days of Noah, so will it be in the days of the Son of Man. It was the same as, now keep in mind, I skip around a little bit. It was the same as happened in the days of Lot. They were eating, they were drinking, they were buying, they were selling, they were planting, basically carrying along just normal everyday life. But on the day that Lot left Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. It will just be the same on the day that the Son of Man is revealed. On that day, the one who will be on his housetop with his goods in his house must not go down to take them out, and likewise the one in the field must not turn back. Remember Lot's wife. In other words, remember, don't run in to get your laptop and credit cards. Go. Whoever strives to save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life will keep it. Now, obviously, Lot's wife wasn't trying to save her life by looking back. But maybe the point is that whoever tries to save your life in your own way, like if you're on the rooftop, you're not trying to kill yourself, but you're trying to save your life your way by running it back in and getting your stuff, or going back in and warning your relatives or whatever. Maybe you feel like you have really good justification for it. But if God specifically told you not to do it, remember, don't do it. And so maybe he's talking about, not that you're intentionally trying to kill yourself, it says if you want to save your life, but that you're trying to save your life in your own way, and you're not surrendering your will to God's will. Okay, so I'll look at a couple examples from the New Testament. I know most of these, well, the other one maybe not as familiar, but most of these are pretty familiar. This one is Ananias and Sapphira. Sapphira. Now, I'm going to read Acts 4, starting in verse 32. And the congregation of those who believed were of one heart and soul. And this is after the day of Pentecost, when there was a lot of religious fervor there. They were all fired up. They had all accepted Jesus. They were very excited to be in a big community. It was all brand new to them, so they were learning stuff like crazy about God's way of life. And so they were one heart and soul, and not one of them claimed that anything belonging to him was his own, but all things were common property to them. Now Joseph, who was also called Barnabas by the apostles, owned a tract of land. And he sold it and brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet. But a man named Ananias, with his wife Sapphira, sold a piece of property and kept back some of the proceeds for himself with his wife's full knowledge, and bringing a portion of it, he laid it at the apostles' feet. But Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and keep back some of the proceeds of the land? While it remained unsold, was it not yours? And after you sold it, you could have kept the money. Why is it that you have conceived to do this deed in your heart? Well, obviously, he wanted to look good in front of everybody else, but he didn't want to give all the money. I mean, this other guy, Joseph, showing him up, right? And you have not lied to men, but to God. And as he heard these words, Ananias collapsed and died. And great fear came over all who heard about it. And the young men got him, covered him up, and carried him out they buried him. Now, about 3 hours later, his wife came in and basically told the same story. And here I was going to interject. Peter didn't actually, curse her, but he didn't warn her either. He said, hey, you're... He was actually testing her, because Peter said, tell me, did you send the land for whatever price the husband had give? So he was testing her. And I'm sure with God's approval. And she goes, oh, yeah, that's what we sold it for. And then Peter said, look, why have y'all conspired against God like this? And behold, those guys that buried your husband are right there, and they're going to do you the same way. And so she died right away. And you can believe great fear came over the whole church, and no lies were told for the next several weeks. So, now Acts 12, that part wasn't in the Bible, I just assume it's true. So Acts 12, and this is the last thing I've got here. Now Herod Agrippa the first was very angry with the people, and that's 20. Did I say Acts 12:20? With the people of Tyre and Sidon. And with one mind they came to him, and they were suing for peace, basically. They were trying to appeal to Agrippa. And because their country was supported with grain from the king's country. And on the appointed day, he put on his royal garb, and Herod took a seat on the rostrum and began delivering address to him. Now, the people will want to butter him up, right? They're trying to, get his favor. And so they started saying, the voice of God and not a man. They're just repeatedly crying out, saying how he was basically a god. Well, and immediately an angel of the Lord struck him because he did not give God the glory, and he was eaten by worms and died. So these are all cases of instant punishment. I mean, they did not get even a second of a second chance. And there's a couple more. I'm just going to mention them. I won't go through these. But in Leviticus 10, it tells the story of Nadab and Abihu. Those are Aaron's sons. And what they had done is they had made an incorrect offering, violated the very strict instructions God had given them. And it says they offered strange fire. I don't know what was strange about it, but something God didn't like. And God sent fire, maybe lightning, and killed them instantly. And then the other incident is in 2 Kings 5. Elisha's servant Gehazi was greedy, and he took payment from a foreign dignitary by fraud, basically, for some things. He had told the guy to go, he healed that guy of leprosy. Nahum, I think his name. But anyway, that guy tried to offer Elisha a bunch of money. Well, Elisha said no, they're not charging for that. Well, Gehazi said, well, hey, if he's going to offer a bunch of money, I'll go get some of it. Well, he did, and when he got back, his punishment was he got to have leprosy for the rest of his life. And it started right then. So that's the instant karma. So these sins involved, the sins involved in these cases were disrespecting elders, ignoring God's instructions, improper worship of God, greed, which led to lying, and then pride. So most of the time, God does not mete out instant punishment. I mean, I would say this is, 1/1,000,000% of the times. It's very, very small. But why are there these few exceptions? I don't really know. Well, I shouldn't say that. I don't know at all. But what we can know from this is that God does take all of these infractions very seriously.